Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, all eyes on President Trump this evening and the White House. He is due to give a press conference. It could start any time soon. When it does, we will cross there. And you'll have noticed that over the course of the last few weeks, firstly, we saw President Macron going to the White House and meeting Trump. Then we saw Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, going to the White House and meeting Donald Trump. And over the last couple of days, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has been in Washington, D.C. He didn't meet the President, but he did meet the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, and he did meet Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And all three have been saying the same thing to Trump and his advisors, namely, maintain the Iran nuclear deal, because they are the three big European signatories to it, albeit the European Union as an organisation wholeheartedly supports it. You could argue that one of the areas in which Obama failed was in terms of foreign policy, but his one achievement, he would say his one achievement was the Iran nuclear deal. What, I hear you ask, is the Iran nuclear deal, which is a pretty fair question to ask. Basically, it's a deal that was struck back in 2015 that says that Iran will have lifted from it very swingeing sanctions, and this is particularly aimed, of course, at oil, which is one of their main exports, the lifting of swingeing sanctions, in return for which Iran will not only stop its nuclear program, but actually reduce its stock of enriched uranium. The deal doesn't cover areas such as ballistic missiles, but it does cover, some of the main components of building a nuclear weapon. Now, those in favour of the deal, namely Obama, the European Union and much of the West and the British government, great believers in this as well. The argument is that you do this and it prevents Iran from moving ahead with its nuclear capability, and therefore it's a price worth paying. The argument against it is that, frankly, we are appeasing perhaps our biggest enemy in that part of the world, a country that is thought to sponsor many terrorist groups around the world. And if you believe Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he says the truth of it is that Iran are very happy with sanctions being lifted, very happy with frozen bank accounts around the rest of the world now being open and available to them. And in return, they say they're reducing their nuclear capability, but actually they are not doing so. Now, Donald Trump, right through the election campaign, described this deal as the worst deal ever. He said it was a rotten deal for America and he would take America out of it. What is he going to do when he's got the three big European countries begging him to renew the deal? Well, there was a press release, a press leak, really, that came out through the AP news agency about 25 minutes ago saying Trump is going to veto America's involvement in this deal. And we understand there's been a conference call that took place within the last 20 minutes between President Trump, Theresa May, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron. And we'll cross live as and when it happens. But I want to ask you, with all this lobbying, with all the belief of France and Germany, the United Kingdom, Obama, John Kerry, who apparently has been in touch with the Iranian regime, which is leading some in America to accuse him of collusion. But with all this lobbying, is Trump making a big mistake by breaking the Iran nuclear deal? And if you think, yep, it's a big mistake, it'll destabilise the Middle East, it could even lead to conflict between Iran and Israel, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, actually, do you know what? Trump is right to do this. He promised the electorate he will, and that is the key to his success, in which case text to 84850. And maybe you think, well, hey, come on, he talked tough with North Korea, it's got them to the table, maybe, just maybe, by reimposing sanctions. And by the way, he can't do this overnight because the deal means it'll take, in fact, 6 months in total to put all the sanctions back in place. But maybe, just maybe, if putting sanctions back on gets moving again, the protests that we saw earlier this year and brings down this Rouhani regime, maybe then and only then does Iran get a decent government. Maybe Trump, talking tough with Iran, will produce the same results as North Korea. If you think that, and I think that's possible, then please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, and of course, watch us on Facebook from the London studio and comment there too. Let's go to Phil, who's a first-time caller from Waterloo. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Nigel. Clearly from Waterloo, but originally from further afield.
I would kind of guess that. Where are you from originally, Phil?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. Right, okay. So, Obama, John Kerry say this was, their greatest foreign policy achievement, but Trump, Bolton, Pompeo appear intent to pull America out of it. How do you feel?
Well, I think it's a terrible mistake. Trump is acting on kind of baser instincts. We speak. You make deals with your enemies. Spend an awful lot of time with the U.S. military, and you make peace deals with your enemies. You need to make peace deals with your friends. We need to have a plan B before we scrap this. And I fully recognize that there are issues within the deal, but until we have something to replace it, by scrapping this, we're putting ourselves in very grave danger.
Phil, isn't there possibly a parallel to be drawn here with 1930s Germany, where, repeatedly America, Britain, France kept saying to Germany, you've got to comply with the terms of the Versailles Treaty. The Germans kept saying they were, and in fact they were lying to us. I mean, wasn't that the classic case of where appeasing...
I am absolutely not a supporter of appeasement, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think you can apply this appeasement in this particular circumstance. There is a deal in place. It may not be perfect. But if the Iranians are proven to be in violation, then by all means.
All right, well,
until that time...
All right, let's turn this around the other way, Phil. Phil, tell me, what are we getting out of this deal? What are we in the West getting out of this deal?
Well, globally, we're looking at non-proliferation, right? We don't want to see more countries getting nuclear weapons. We don't want to see it in Korea, and we don't want to see it in Iran. We've made a deal with Iran to keep them from having a weapons-grade program. And until they violate that, we shouldn't be punishing them or withdrawing or changing the terms at the 11th hour. So,
hang on, Phil.
The region.
Hang on, Phil. Trump is entitled to change this because we've had an election since Obama signed the United States up to it. It's quite legitimate, is it not, for Trump to withdraw from this democratically?
Well, yeah, absolutely, Nigel. And, that also brings up a huge concern within America and many Americans. Does the president have too much power? If every 4 years or 8 years you get a new administration and every deal that prior administration has brought into enactment can get thrown out, well, then who's going to make a deal with the United States? This is a major issue.
Well, yeah.
But at the end of the day, we have, once we put our name on an agreement, whether it's a prior administration or not, despite the disagreements you might have, take it back to the table, renegotiate it. That's fine. But for every administration to then chuck out what the previous one has done, it's just going to be a repetitive cycle of nothing getting completed and all agreements being suspect.
But that kind of is why the shocks of 16 happen, Phil, because one of the arguments against EU membership, one of the arguments for voting Trump, was that actually electors do not want to be bound by previous administrations. But moving on from that, the criticism that you raised that is perhaps the most valid one was, what is your alternative? What is your plan B? And Trump has not laid this out clearly, and I understand that. But, Phil, let me tell you what I think it is. Of all those countries, the Iranians have produced some of the best educated people. I mean, it is a country with some amazing talent within it. And yet I think we'd all be agreed that it's actually got a very bad administration, bad in terms of the way it manages the economy, high unemployment, inflation. Even despite the lifting of sanctions, they've still got those problems. Phil, I'm going to have to love you and leave you. We're going live to the White House to hear President Trump.
Prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The Iranian regime is the leading state sponsor of terror. It exports dangerous missiles, fuels conflicts across the Middle East, and supports terrorist proxies and militias such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda. Over the years, Iran and its proxies have bombed American embassies and military installations, murdered hundreds of American service members, and kidnapped, imprisoned, and tortured American citizens. The Iranian regime has funded its long reign of chaos and terror by plundering the wealth of its own people. No action taken by the regime has been more dangerous than its pursuit of nuclear weapons and the means of delivering them. In 2015, the previous administration joined with other nations in a deal regarding Iran's nuclear program. This agreement was known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. In theory, the so-called Iran deal was supposed to protect the United States and our allies from the lunacy of an Iranian nuclear bomb, a weapon that will only endanger the survival of the Iranian regime. In fact, the deal allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium and, over time, reach the brink of a nuclear breakout. The deal lifted crippling economic sanctions on Iran in exchange for very weak limits on the regime's nuclear activity and no limits at all on its other malign behavior, including its sinister activities in Syria, Yemen, and other places all around the world. In other words, at the point when the United States had maximum leverage, this disastrous deal gave this regime, and it's a regime of great terror, many billions of dollars, some of it in actual cash. A great embarrassment to me as a citizen and to all citizens of the United States. A constructive deal could easily have been struck at the time, but it wasn't. At the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program. Today, we have definitive proof that this Iranian promise was a lie. Last week, Israel published intelligence documents, long concealed by Iran, conclusively showing the Iranian regime and its history of pursuing nuclear weapons. The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. In the years since the deal was reached, Iran's military budget has grown by almost 40%, while its economy is doing very badly. After the sanctions were lifted, the dictatorship used its new funds to build nuclear-capable missiles, support terrorism, and cause havoc throughout the Middle East and beyond. The agreement was so poorly negotiated that even if Iran fully complies, the regime can still be on the verge of a nuclear breakout in just a short period of time. The deal's sunset provisions are totally unacceptable. If I allowed this deal to stand, there would soon be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Everyone would want their weapons ready by the time Iran had theirs. Making matters worse, the deal's inspection provisions lack adequate mechanisms to prevent, detect, and punish cheating, and don't even have the unqualified right to inspect many important locations, including military facilities. Not only does the deal fail to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions, but it also fails to address the regime's development of ballistic missiles that could deliver nuclear warheads. Finally, the deal does nothing to constrain Iran's destabilizing activities, including its support for terrorism. Since the agreement, Iran's bloody ambitions have grown only more brazen. In light of these glaring flaws, I announced last October that the Iran deal must either be renegotiated or terminated. 3 months later, on January 12th, I repeated these conditions. I made clear that if the deal could not be fixed, the United States would no longer be a party to the agreement. Over the past few months, we have engaged extensively with our allies and partners around the world, including France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. We have also consulted with our friends from across the Middle East. We are unified in our understanding of the threat and in our conviction that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. After these consultations, it is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. In just a short period of time, the world's leading state sponsor of terror will be on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction, and we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. Today's action sends a critical message. The United States no longer makes empty threats. When I make promises, I keep them. In fact, at this very moment, Secretary Pompeo is on his way to North Korea in preparation for my upcoming meeting with Kim Jong-un. Plans are being made, relationships are building. Hopefully a deal will happen, and with the help of China, South Korea, and Japan, a future of great prosperity and security can be achieved for everyone. As we exit the Iran deal, we will be working with our allies to find a real, comprehensive, and lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear threat. This will include efforts to eliminate the threat of Iran's ballistic missile program, to stop its terrorist activities worldwide, and to block its menacing activity across the Middle East. In the meantime, powerful sanctions will go into full effect. If the regime continues its nuclear aspirations, it will have bigger problems than it has ever had before. Finally, I want to deliver a message to the long-suffering people of Iran. The people of America stand with you. It has now been almost 40 years since this dictatorship seized power and took a proud nation hostage. Most of Iran's 80 million citizens have sadly never known an Iran that prospered in peace with its neighbors and commanded the admiration of the world. But the future of Iran belongs to its people. They are the rightful heirs to a rich culture and an ancient land, and they deserve a nation that does justice to their dreams, honor to their history, and glory to God. Iran's leaders will naturally say that they refuse to negotiate a new deal. They refuse, and that's fine. I'd probably say the same thing if I was in their position. But the fact is they are going to want to make a new and lasting deal, one that benefits all of Iran and the Iranian people. When they do, I am ready, willing, and able. Great things can happen for Iran, and great things can happen for the peace and stability that we all want in the Middle East. There has been enough suffering, death, and destruction. Let it end now. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
You're listening to LBC. That was President Donald Trump from the White House explaining why America is pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. He said that the deal had been disastrous and one-sided. It was supposed to protect America and its allies, but instead it had allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium. He said the deal had failed to halt their nuclear ambitions and the development of ballistic missiles, which in fact were not part of that deal that was struck back in 2015. So he's made it very clear that the US will withdraw from the Iran deal, and he's signed the document, the presidential order, to that effect. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail, said Trump. He also was very critical of the Iranian regime that's been in place now for nearly 40 years, but he spoke some very warm words about the Iranian people, their history, their culture. I mentioned myself earlier, their levels of education. Big country, 80 million people. Trump said that he's more than prepared to negotiate again with them if they come back with a sensible deal. He also, interestingly, made a big point of saying that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, was not there in the room because, as we speak, he's on a plane to North Korea. So this is Trump saying to the world, I am not a wrecker. I am not a warmonger. You know, I've played tough with North Korea and it's working, they're talking. I will not go on following a policy that he sees, the one set up by Obama but supported by the European Union and particularly by Britain, France and Germany. I will not go on supporting what he sees as appeasement. But I think the subtext there is very clear. That he would like the Iranian people to rise up and get rid of that regime. And of course we have seen repeatedly, we see mini revolutions that get quashed. Fascinating. One comment on that if you read the words on the page that Trump just delivered, they are tough, uncompromising words, but actually delivered in a very measured, very calm tone. It's kind of a different, more confident Donald Trump, I think, in many, many ways. Let's get a quick hit reaction. Let's go to Coralville, Iowa, and speak to Mark, who's never called the show before. Mark, good afternoon.
Hello there, Nigel. Thank you for having me.
Not one bit.
I think that the dawn is breaking to free and democratic Iran. Iranian people thought they can get freedom and prosperity out of the deal, and now they are very angry. They didn't get anything out of it, and there is a very high potential of a regime change. The only thing Iranians need to unify the opposition in exile from monarchist or Republican, they have to sit together and find a solution to get out of it. As an Iranian, I can tell you that this can be achievable maybe in 3 or 4 months, and we can get out of this regime. Although I know that you are in favor of Jojo, however, I think that here there is exception, and the Iranian regime should go.
Yeah, Mark, how long have you been in America?
About 5 years.
Right, so you're Iranian born and bred, yeah?
Yes.
And how easy was it to get out of that country?
Well, it was very difficult. Imagine that the dollar price is rising, and if you want to go for other countries for education, it's very hard. On the other hand, sometimes when you do some political activities, they seize your passport, so basically they detain you in the country. And for us, it was a very hard journey. On the other hand, imagine that we don't have any embassy in the United States, so we don't have any support from the Iranian government.
No.
So pretty much
so Mark, Trump's done the right thing, and you really think that the people of Iran could bring this regime down within the next 2, 3, 4 years?
I think so. However, Nigel, you should stand with us. For instance, many Iranian MPs and also cabinet members, they live or their family live in UK or United States or Germany. And thanks to some people from Laborious Party, for instance, like Jack Straw or Sadiq Khan, they have a very strong...
He's gone.
Word.
We've lost it. We've lost Mark. Well, that's a shame. But that was Mark, an Iranian who's got out of Iran, living in America, thinks Trump has done the right thing, wants this regime to fall. For those just catching up with the news, Trump has just spoken in the White House and has said the US is withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, and Boris had wasted his time going to Washington. Let's get a quick reaction from Burkhan in Sidcup. Is Trump making a mistake with this, Burkhan?
The biggest mistake of his political career.
OK, explain.
Well, basically, I'm listening to your last call. The people do hate the regime, but everyone in that country hates America. They look around the whole of the Middle East. They look around where it's been invaded, who's been taken out, and the puppet presidents they have in place. They do not want America to help them with their internal problems. And I personally think that this is going to cause tension. Sanctions are going to be put on Iran, and it's the people there are going to struggle. And it's a bad move. And
well, the people are struggling. I mean, Burkhan, to be fair, given a very badly managed country and economy, the people are struggling already, aren't they?
Yeah, but with sanctions put on plates, it's going to be much worse.
Right. So the risk, Burkhan, is the people suffer more and they blame America and not their own regime. Yeah.
Exactly that. But let's just get to one thing here, Nigel. And this is from my personal opinion. Now, I've studied these people, and I personally think the nuclear weapons are already built. Forget Rouhani. I think they were built under Ahmadinejad. I've studied these people, and these people are very clever. No matter what you think about the Iranian people are very clever. No matter with this nuclear deal, I personally think they're already built, and I think...
Well, you may be right. You may be right. Intelligence suggests not. But Burkhan, thank you. And Burkhan thinking Trump has made a huge mistake. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 7:30. And within the last half an hour, Donald Trump has made it very clear that America is withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. He said it's a disastrous one-sided deal that, frankly, has done nothing to halt Iran's nuclear ambition, and in particular their development of ballistic missiles, which were not covered, in fact, by the 2015 agreement. And what Trump is saying to the American nation is, why are we doing a favour to a country that sponsors terrorism? Why are we helping a country where people go out and chant death to America? And what he's saying is he's quite prepared to talk to Iran if they come back with a better deal. I think, actually, behind all of this, what he really wants, my own view, he wants regime change. That's my opinion. But let's go to Washington, D.C. Let's go to the city that is very Democrat, was very pro-Obama, very pro-Hillary. And Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent, I guess this will be met with some horror tonight in Washington.
Well, I think horror in several capitals, but horror among those foreign policy fixtures here in Washington, D.C., who decried President Trump when he was on the campaign trail in 2016, and when he said he was going to do precisely what he's gone ahead and done, Nigel. I mean, this is a hard exit from the Iran nuclear deal. There were those here wondering whether, as he did with the Paris climate change accords, he might leave the window slightly ajar for a renegotiation of this particular agreement. But it's pretty apparent, having made that speech where he talked about it as being rotten and decaying to the core. He said it didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. I mean, he's slamming the door on any idea that this particular agreement can have new life breathed into it. He's going to face, I think, some difficulty even within his own inner circle. It's worth underscoring the fact that within the last couple of months, Mike Pompeo, the man who's now his Secretary of State, and the Director of National Intelligence, they both told lawmakers on Capitol Hill they believed that Iran was in compliance with the spirit of the deal. But interesting that President Trump didn't even mention whether or not Iran is in compliance with the deal. He just thinks it's a terrible deal. And in the minutes since he's finished speaking, reporters here in Washington have all received a press release from the White House that is headlined, President Donald J. Trump is ending U.S. participation in an unacceptable Iran deal. And that is very much the way this is being presented to the public. He is, according to this press release, protecting America from a bad deal. And, you know, critics of President Trump, supporters of President Trump, they can agree on one thing. He said he was going to do this on the campaign trail, and he's done it. Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing, Simon, I always say to people, you know, he does actually hold faith with the promises you made on the campaign trail, whether you like them or not. I also thought what was very interesting, he made great play of the fact that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, was not there, but was on his way to North Korea. Yes, absolutely, to pave the way for that summit meeting that President Trump is expected to hold in June, we think, with Kim Jong-un, which, of course, will in and of itself be an utterly extraordinary event to witness on the world stage. It will be interesting to see how the reaction to this announcement emanates from Iran. Interesting, too, to wonder how it's all going down in North Korea. And President Trump there saying, you know, the era of empty promises from the United States and empty threats is absolutely over. That was a message, I think, as much directed as at Pyongyang as it was as the Iranian capital. Yes. Simon, thank you very much. That was Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. And some reaction here. Emmanuel Macron says France, Germany and the UK regret the US decision to leave the JCPOA, the official name of the deal. The nuclear non-proliferation regime is at stake. So Macron clearly believing that it was actually working. And Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has echoed Trump's earlier comments and says the Iran deal was a recipe for disaster. And the Iranian state TV have reacted, and they've said President Trump's decision to pull out of the agreement they've described as illegal, illegitimate, and undermines international agreements. Well, yeah, but isn't this the point, folks, that if you vote for different governments with different policies, you have to be able to break international agreements, whether it's with Iran or whether it's with the European Union. So Trump has gone for a hard exit, not a soft exit, from the Iranian deal. There'll be one or two Eurosceptics wishing Theresa May could do the same with our Brexit negotiations. Let's go to Ron in Shepherd's Bush. Ron, good evening.
Yes, hi.
How do you react to Trump's statement?
Well, it was a matter of he said that he was going to do it, and being the sort of rash, unbalanced character that he is, he will do it. He's a nationalist. And, Ron, we got a rotten line. We're going to come back to you because that's awful. Chris says, like all things the president does, it's just his first move. A man like Trump is thinking ahead. He wants to change it. Well, Chris, that may well be right, may not. Let's ask Jonathan in Barnet for his reaction to Trump's statement. Good evening.
What a fabulous speech that was. You couldn't have a bigger contrast between him and Obama. I'm delighted that he's pulling out. Iran had a 10-year pathway to a nuclear weapon. This is a state that is hated by all of its neighbors, not just Israel, but all of the Gulf states as well. This is a state that wants to dominate the Middle East and will stop at nothing to do it. This is a state that hangs gays from trees, a state that persecutes women, a state that doesn't respect human rights. Well done, Donald Trump, is what I say. The deal was full of holes. Ballistic missiles were outside the deal. They lied to the IAEA about the past program. It allowed unlimited enriched uranium. The inspections were very limited. You had to notify Iran before you had an inspection.
I know, what a farce! What a farce!
You know, it was Nigel. I don't agree with you on Europe. Full stop. But this was an absolute farce. And well done, Donald Trump.
And yet, Europe, Jonathan, was the biggest supporter of this deal.
Well, that doesn't mean to say, Nigel, that the EU is a bad thing.
Not necessarily. I'll grant you that, Jonathan. Not necessarily.
Nigel, I would point to you the following thing. Did you see how quickly German captains of industry queued up to to go to Iran when that deal was announced. They couldn't get on the plane fast enough. This was a deal about European exports, and Iran's appalling record of human rights just went out of the window. And I applaud Donald Trump for mentioning their appalling record of human rights, for mentioning the fact that they're the principal sponsor of state terrorism. Well done, Donald Trump.
Okay.
I wish that.
Okay, Jonathan, you couldn't be clearer. You couldn't be clearer. Well done, Donald Trump, says Jonathan from Barnet. He liked it. The Israeli Prime Minister thanks Donald Trump for his courageous leadership following the president's announcement that the US will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. And it was interesting, I thought, in the speech, the way in which Trump referred to the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Clearly, that is an incredibly strong alliance. Let's go to Abadeo, who's calling from Norwood. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. So, has Trump got it right, or has he got it wrong?
First of all, your previous caller is really, really wrong. I'm sure if we look very well, we can count on our fingers so many American allies that have appalling human rights. So for him to mention just Iran is far from the truth. Anyway, that aside, I want to look at this from another angle. I just believe that your man in the White House is only interested in obliterating Obama's legacy in the White House. That is the only thing. And if we look at everything that Obama has set up, the Obama administration has set up, we look at the Iran deal, which was the crown jewel of his administration. We look at Obamacare. We look at the climate, the Paris Accord. He's just found a way and found excuses to nullify everything. I can't understand what is going on. He mentioned in the speech, that Europe, that's Germany, the United Kingdom, and France have looked and they agreed. And now we are hearing press reports saying that from France saying that they are very sad that U.S. pulled out. So who is lying here? Who is lying here? I mean, this thing could have been renegotiated. There's so many ways that he could have gone about. He didn't need to pull out of it. And all these things are just excuses. It's not going to bring peace to the region. I mean, you want something that will bring peace at the end of the day.
Well, Abadeo, I think that what he's really saying is this. Let's put swinging sanctions back on Iran. Yes, that means people will suffer even more, but maybe, but hang on, hear me out, maybe, just maybe, that will give them the courage to bring down this appalling regime that for 40 years has wrecked what was once a great country.
Nigel, but the sanctions were there for a very long time before Obama brought this deal about. Why didn't they come then?
Well, I tell you what, it's worked in North Korea. It's worked in North Korea. China clearly made life pretty intolerable in North Korea. What if they really were? Abadeo, you and I are not going to agree, but it's a great conversation. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:45. Donald Trump has pulled the USA out of the Iran nuclear deal, saying that it was disastrous and it was not stopping Iran's push to get nuclear weapons. And a bit of reaction from the rest of the administration. John Bolton, a national security advisor, has said that the move to withdraw from the agreement sends a message to North Korea that the US will not accept inadequate deals. Now, when I spoke to Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent, he made the point that the last half of that speech was directed as much to North Korea indeed as it was to Iran. Saudi Arabia has come out and said that it supports Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. And the Iranian leader, Rouhani, has spoken and says America's decision was an historical experience for Iran and that the US has never fulfilled its commitments. Well, I think they're rather both saying that about each other. Let's go to Mill Hill. A first-time caller, Yusuf. Good evening, Yusuf.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me.
Not one bit.
Okay. Well, I'm an Iranian myself. I was there a month ago.
Okay.
Regarding Iran's economy, I have to say, Iran's are suffering from economy. The sanction even removed 2 years ago didn't make any difference for Iranian ordinary people. Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious about this because the currency is still collapsing, isn't it? Unemployment's still very high.
Exactly. But the thing is, I'll have to admit that I don't really like Trump administration. But for the first time, when I was listening to his speech, I thought maybe he's the guy who can do something here for Iranian and remove this regime from my country. But again, the problem is, you can't really trust this guy and let him to do it. And the other problem is, as an Iranian myself, I lived here for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I know lots of people in Iran as well, and keep going there and talking to them. I do not think Iranian people like American or any other country to come to their country and start removing and interfering to my country. That's another thing. And the other problem is that the main problem, I think, is even when a few months ago when people came into the streets and protest.
I mean, I covered this, and those protests seemed to rather peter out, didn't they?
Yeah, it did. And obviously, Iranian regime don't care. They kill Iranian people. This is the problem. You might don't like Iranian people. I might don't like Iranian people. I can tell you 90% of Iranian people don't like this regime. But the problem is, the main problem for Iranian people is, if this regime goes, who is coming in instead? Who is coming to help Iranian? If Trump looking to do something with Iran...
I think, Yusuf, firstly, I don't think there's a cat's chance in hell of America directly intervening in Iran. That is not going to happen. But I do think that the real message today was, to Iranian people, please bring down this regime. And frankly, whatever comes after it can't be as bad as the last 40 years.
Okay, I'll tell you something, Nigel. All right, they tried about 4 years ago when the Ahmadinejad was there, when the election was corrupted, and they killed Iranian people. They couldn't do it. They did it a few months ago. They couldn't do it. That's what the problem is. With the sanction that he's putting on, the only thing's going to happen, it's going to put Iranian people under more pressure. And unfortunately, not going to make any difference with this guy. If he really wants to do it, I just don't understand. When really the protest was happening, why he didn't came up and say, okay, I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you free internet, free movement of the information. And the only things people suffering is that information not getting to each other, if everybody's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, the internet now, with any uprising of any kind at all, is a vital weapon. Yusuf, I thank you for your call and for your passion. I really, really do. And President Rouhani of Iran now says that actually that Tehran will remain in a nuclear deal without the US, which, of course, puts us, France and Germany, the European Union position. We are now diametrically opposed to the USA. There'll be some fallout from that. I'm betting Boris wishes he'd never made the journey across to DC over the course of the last couple of days. Let's go to Stephen, a first-time caller from Barnet. Good evening, Stephen.
Hi, Nigel. Nice to talk to you. I wanted to say that I think what Donald Trump has done today is long overdue. The deal itself is a complete disaster. It doesn't actually prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. It just basically kicks the can down the road. And that was Obama's main achievement, was to basically, push something off and let someone else deal with it. And Trump is basically doing what he's done with North Korea. And he's saying this is not acceptable and it needs to be dealt with. And if no one else is going to deal with it, then I'll have to deal with it myself, regardless of what the rest of the world says. And the European powers, unfortunately, are basically spineless, similar to the way that they didn't stand up to the Nazis prior to World War II. The Iranian regime is disgusting.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it does feel there are elements of appeasement here too, Stephen. I would certainly agree with that. Now, there are some, Stephen, questioning his motives. I get, for example, a text here. This is all about Obama, nothing else. Trump is determined at all costs to wipe Obama from history. How do you feel about that criticism?
Well, I mean, you can say that. Obama did lots of stupid things, so anyone who's sensible would want to overturn them. And the Iran deal was one of those things. Rapprochement with Cuba, another dictatorship.
Yeah.
that he tried to improve relationships with.
And he did promise he'd do this in the election, didn't he?
Exactly, he's doing what he said. And if you actually look what's going on in the regime, it doesn't get much. I'm Israeli, actually. It doesn't get much reporting over here. A few months ago, or 2 months ago, the Iranians tried to send a drone from Syria armed with explosives, and it was shot down. It was then reported that, there were airstrikes on bases in Syria. The Iranians now, the IDF is now on high alert, expecting an Iranian missile strike in northern Israel.
Does this, Stephen, just very quickly, does America pulling out of this deal increase the likelihood of short-term tensions, or perhaps worse, between Israel and Iran?
Well, I think the thing is that the deal itself only emboldened Iran. If you look at what's happened since the deal was struck, everywhere there's violence and problem, you can see the Iranian hand in there. In Yemen, in Syria, in Bahrain.
Stephen, I'm going to let you go. I'd love to speak to you for longer. Lots of people I want whose voices are going to go. Neil, a first-time caller from Stanmore. Good evening, Neil.
Hello, Nigel. I think it's quite interesting. We wouldn't have done this without the support of the rest of the Middle East, including the Saudis. So he's clearly got some leverage, which is going to be used to bring forward some kind of peace deal somewhere. But personally, I'm very upset with the British position on this, because it can only be to do with trade. I mean, as somebody said earlier, they were so desperate to get out there and sort of start selling stuff. So what are they trying to sell? They're trying to buy oil, but are they trying to sell weapons to them? Are they trying to do other things? I really can't understand where good old Boris is coming at this from.
Yeah, I mean, it did look a bit futile, him going out to America, didn't it? And it was said that he appeared on Fox and Friends, the breakfast show that Fox do, very popular breakfast show that Fox do, because that was the only way he felt he could get a message to President Trump. And that says to me something about the way this American administration is viewing the UK administration.
Yeah, quite possibly. But the other interesting thing is the link between Iran and North Korea. Because, in my opinion, there's no doubt that whilst they've been allegedly stopped from doing things in Iran, they've been employing North Korea to help them out.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Neil, I'm going to have to let you go. Time is running away from me. And a European Union response. Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, says Mr. Trump's stance on Iran and trade needs a unified European approach. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Donald Tusk. That's terrific, isn't it? So there we are. And that leaves the UK in a difficult position. For my money, I think Trump is right. I think it was a rotten deal. I can't see, frankly, what we were really getting out of it. And I hope the British start to rethink things. But, of course, as you know, I am a supporter of Trump. I've never hidden that. And I believe he actually, for what he's done in North Korea, should be put forward for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, I really, really do. I've talked about this, interviewed people for my latest podcast, Farage Against the Machine. Find out my reasons why I think he deserves this honour. Subscribe to Farage Against the Machine. You can get it on iTunes, or if you've got an Android device, go to lbc.co.uk. Trump has withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal. Like it or not, he promised the electorate it's what he'd do. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night at 7. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next and continuing this conversation is Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.